Cool. I'm so excited about this panel today. We have the most awesome group of experts with expertise ranging the whole spectrum of what's required to deliver on the promise of Hearables. So we are going to try and get through as much as possible in the short 45 minutes, but it's such a rich topic for a lot of discussion. And I'm excited just to sort of level set. The term Hearables to me is a little bit lacking in sort of communicate the profound shift that these devices can have on the future of the way that we interact with digital information. We've had headphones that are wireless for a while that just deliver audio. We've had hearing devices that amplify sound. But these devices have the potential to give us live translations on demand, to obviously allow us to interact with our voice assistants. They might have biometric sensors in them and monitor our health. They might monitor our balance. So there's so much that goes beyond listening to audio and interacting with audio. So I'd love to just start with quick introductions, if you'll say your name, and how the work that you're doing or the company that you're with integrates into this ecosystem that makes Hearables possible.
Hi, my name is Andreea Danielescu. I'm currently at Accenture Technology Labs as a research manager. But previously I worked at Intel for just under 5 years working in the wearable space, specifically with hearables and conversational interfaces.
Hi, my name is Rachel Batish. I'm VP Product at a company called AudioBurst. We're a startup company providing with spoken word audio content, which is actually integrating also into Hearables.
Hi, I'm Dave Kemp. I am with a company called Oaktree Products. I also write for a blog called futureear.co. Oaktree Products is a distributor of clinical supplies and assistive listening devices to the hearing healthcare professionals, so audiologists, ENT doctors. So I'm really focused on hearing aids as they are kind of at the forefront of hearable technology, and then also with the consumerization with the hearables that are coming out.
I'm Andy Bellavia, Director of Market Development for Knowles Corp. We're an acoustic solution provider for smart speakers, mobile phones, and actually the original product for which the company was started, hearing aids. We actually invented the acoustic solutions that are used in modern hearing aids, and today it's the same technologies that are going into hearables.
I'm Eric Seay, co-founder and CMO of Audio UX. We're a future-forward sonic branding company, and so what that means for technology like this is we're designing what these non-visual cues are going to sound like. So what's the audio equivalent of a drop-down menu? What's the content going to sound like when a brand always has your ear?
Awesome. Andy, I'd love to start with you. A lot of the technologies that we use in our daily lives have some foundation in accessibility research or technologies, and we just heard a little bit about where hearables can potentially go. What's the state of the art of the hardware right now, and what's making it such a hot topic of discussion at this moment? And then second part, what is it going to take to reach mass adoption?
Well, in that respect, the hearing aids have been way ahead of the hearables. If you look at it, for example, this device, it's small, comfortable, the battery lasts all day long, and it's Bluetooth connected now. That's something the hearable people can only dream of. You look at the battery life of a typical true wireless in-ear device. It's not the 18 or 20 hours I can get out of these. But those technologies are converging. The two main issues regarding battery life are the speakers and the audio processors, the DSPs. Now, hearing aids have the solution in the speakers. It's the special speakers called ballast armatures that our company's founder invented something like 50 years ago. They're so miniature, it was the first means, along with transistors, that allowed hearing aids to be placed on the face in the form of glasses, like those Bose frames, instead of in a big, package. And so we've had 50 years of development, and some of the newer competitors too, to drive smallest possible size, highest quality sound, and lowest power consumption. And we've been the leader since the beginning for 50 years on that. So that's more or less taken care of. The DSP side is a little bit different because in hearing aids, the battery consumption is very, very low by designing highly customized ASICs as the audio processors. You have all the audio processing running in hardware, so you can do it at very low power. But there's a price to pay for that. It's expensive process to do that. And there are more AirPods sold every year than the world supply of hearing aids. And so when you have 5 companies developing custom ASICs for hearing aids, it's going to get expensive. That's the price you pay for 18 hours battery life. But the Bluetooth integrated DSPs for hearable power consumption is now coming down and down. Both, that's Moore's law, right? Each one gets better than the next in terms of processing power and battery life and cost. And the other is that the Bluetooth protocols are advancing so that you can have lower power Bluetooth connection as well. So now you're starting to see the audio DSP power come down. And it's interesting we can see it because in the hearing aid, the DSP power isn't much more than the speaker power, so there's really a lot of emphasis on low power consumption in the speaker. Well, last generation hearables, when people considered using our balanced armature drivers, it was all about small size. We talk about power consumption, they say, well, it doesn't matter because the DSP is consuming so much. But now we actually start to see it. We had a customer publish their battery life with a regular speaker and the balanced armature, and they were getting about 20% more battery life when the balanced armature is used, which is good for us, of course, because it's the hearing aid value proposition. But it also means the DSP power is coming down, closer and closer to hearing aid levels. And when that happens, and now you can really start thinking about consumer-priced hearables with all-day battery life, you enable a whole world of experiences. Now, you asked about mass adoption. I think the hardware is now falling into place, and what's missing is the voice user experience. As I talk to people here, not many people are thinking specifically about voice experiences for when you're wearing hearables on foot. In Heidi Culbertson's panel yesterday, some of those things came up. For example, if I'm walking down the street and I am mobility impaired for one reason or another, I'm really interested in knowing which metro stations have escalators. And so the walking directions could incorporate that. Or what Bose is doing, he's wearing the Bose frames. They're demonstrations where I'm walking and I turn and face a restaurant and I'm asked if I want reviews of the place. So when voice experiences begin to be built out for hearables, then it's going to be compelling to wear them all day long. And I think it opens up a world of accessibility options as well, because voice is such a natural communications medium. Let's say, you're visually impaired. Well, now you can interact with the world strictly by voice, wherever you are. Or as one of the people on Heidi's panel mentioned, you have an armload of groceries. You don't have to be permanently impaired. You have an armload of groceries. It's great to be able to interact by voice with your hearables. So as those experiences are developed, I think it's going to be a completely new world in the way people interact with technology and each other through hearables.
Awesome. So we've got miniaturization, we've got lower power consumption, lower cost, and that's setting the foundation for these to get in our hands or in our ears. But the experience design might not be there. We haven't had a chance to experiment as product designers, experience designers, although some of us have. Andreea, you've worked with Oakley and Intel early days on some experiences that are meant for cycling, running, and that brings about a lot of challenges in terms of environment, connectivity, and those kinds of things. Can you speak to some of those challenges, and how can experienced designers that are entering the field ensure that they're accommodating for all of those considerations?
Sure. So in our case, what we were doing is making sure that runners and cyclists could go anywhere they wanted to go, which meant limited connectivity or no connectivity at all, and still be able to interact with a full conversational assistant. That means that we had a pair of sunglasses that operated as a sensor hub and had audio processing on board. And that audio then was sent over to a phone, which you were tethered to. And that phone contained all of your AI coaching system, your conversational system, everything. Dealing with that environment is extremely challenging. First off, you're limited in the domain model that you can have. So you can't really have a conversational system that can answer everything and anything. You really have to be focused on the situation and the context with which you're really trying to optimize for. The other thing is that when you're cycling at 20, 30 miles an hour going downhill, there are a lot of challenges that come into play. Some of them are along the lines of your environment. Wind speed and wind noise is a big, big factor, and you have to actually train your acoustic models for that. So a lot of time actually went into data collection and training the acoustic models to make sure that we can handle it, and modifying the hardware for that. So we had a pretty nice, sleek set of glasses. The glasses looked exactly like the Radar P series that Oakley regularly has. That design did not accommodate cycling at that level. So what we had to do is have an add-on that was essentially a wing that could cover the microphone in those cases. It also, when you're running and cycling, it's a high intensity sport and you have to actually pay attention to what you're doing. Again, when you're cycling downhill at 20, 30 miles an hour and you're sharing the road with cars, you don't want to be distracted by the thing on your head or the thing in your ear, right? So when it comes to designing for that, you really have to think through, what does that mean? How often can I interrupt? What are the sounds that I'm playing? Are they audible to the user? When there's a car coming by, how do I deal with instances in which maybe they don't hear? So we had actually a multi-turn conversational system, which means that the user could ask a question, the system would answer, and then actually hold the channel open for the user to ask follow-on questions. Similarly, if the system decided to correct something that the user was doing, it would wait to see if the user had follow-on questions about what it had just said. And in those instances, you could easily pick up noise around you that was not meant for the system. So being able to handle that, being able to also tell the user when the channel was open and when it wasn't, being able to handle, and we actually ended up creating custom sounds for the entire experience. We created custom TTS voices, custom sounds. We tested significantly in situ to be able to make sure that people could actually hear these systems. And we kept all of our output really, really short. And this was actually critical. Users could always ask follow-up questions, so if they wanted to know something specific, we made sure to handle as many input variants as we could possibly manage. But like when you ask heart rate, right? Oh, and the other thing was we had to handle short inputs too. Like when you're gasping for breath, the last thing you want to do is ask like a long question, right? So we had to be able to support questions like, what's my workout for today? When you're not running? But also something as simple as heart rate or summary while you are running or cycling. So those are the kinds of considerations as you're developing and building these systems that you really have to think about. Like, there's so many things going on in the world around you. You really can't be diverting users from their primary goal and objective. The agent is there to really help out, not to be obtrusive and distracting.
So as you described, not every experience requires or even works with that conversational paradigm or metaphor. Mark Webster gave an amazing talk the other day that hinted at this as well, which was awesome. Curious about what the new tools for designers' tool belts are in terms of conveying meaning through sound. And Eric, your company is totally premised on doing.
I think the biggest things to focus on are that Hearables are really enabling the facilitation of sonic branding. And so the first thing you start with is the end user, right? Because we already see many people in the audience have those frames. And so this is an easily accessible hearable device that's giving people the opportunity to really have their own sonic brand and to be able to walk around with your own brand theme. I think the second part is more on the product side, because now brands that are actually making these devices, how are people going to interact without a visual interface? And I think we've spoken about this before, how phones in a way are almost just becoming a secondary multimodal device for visuals, or they have the potential to. And so the things we're actively involved in prototyping, and as you mentioned with Bose's demonstrations of restaurants, you may have seen our creative director, Sean Thornton, at South by Southwest this year. We were talking about the development guidelines that we're helping work on for Bose to enable these developers to introduce the best audio experience they can when designing these experiences. And so you don't want to overload people with sound, obviously, but I think we found that too little sound can also be confusing. And so we're showcasing experiences like you mentioned, where if there's a dual opt-in scenario where you know that you like a particular kind of place, next week we're traveling to Canada, but say I want still an American cheeseburger, I can dual opt in to something like McDonald's, walk around and have that spatially rendered and you can then use audio as a wayfinding experience. And then I think most importantly too, like I mentioned before, what happens when a brand always has your ear. It's a space that I think they should be careful with because it's already one thing to have Alexa in your living room and to always have access, a brand always having access to you in terms of delivering audio experiences, but what happens now when it's always with you? You certainly don't want to abuse that privilege in a way, and you want to be careful with the hierarchy of experiences that you deliver to people. But that said, it's just a really exciting time for then brands to be able to use more things like, beyond just the sonic logo like I mentioned, but on the product side, what does it sound like when you pair around these hearables for the first time? And how do you navigate those experiences without visuals? So that's a really exciting space we're in right now.
I have actually a follow-up question for you. How do you handle instances in which the TTS voice and the audio that's coming through may be at odds, or how do you navigate that space?
Right. So one thing we do with working on any product is competitive research, which for us is a musical thing as well. And so we want to make sure that experiences are compatible in terms of, say you have third-party hardware and another experience, you certainly don't want conflicting key signatures and things like that with sound. You had mentioned a really interesting use case in terms of mic off being more important than mic on when you have follow-up questions enabled because the mic's open much longer than people think, right? So those are the user experience considerations that we also take into effect. The really interesting thing though between sounds and voice is, any Alexa users here that might be using brief mode, you find that it's a little more efficient, like I have smart lighting, and so if I tell my device to turn off the bedroom lights or turn them on, instead of just hearing okay, you get a rather pleasant sound. And I think that brief is such a key word because I think sounds have the power to really reduce the verbosity and verbiage of some of these experiences and get you to the content you want to engage with sooner. And so, if a picture's worth 1,000 words, an earcon can at least be worth 4 or 5. Reduce the sentence structure a little bit and get to what you want to be. So.
Nice. And you brought up location-based audio, which is a really rich area, obviously, for hearables on the go. I'd love to ask Rachel you a question and then follow up Dave about some predictions about how we might consume location-based audio in the future. Rachel, your company is making audio searchable and digestible. How will our consumption of location-based audio change the way that we catalog these databases? And will people be sort of notified when there's content that is available and relevant to them based on their location? Or will we constantly need to search for actively based on something we saw?
Yeah, so I think it's a. I think it's a good. Oh, that's okay. I think it's actually a great question, and I think there's still a difference between where we are today and where we're going to be in the future. I agree that when I do my workout, I don't want to listen to anything. I need to focus, maybe some music, but I definitely don't want anyone to talk with me. On the other hand, I think just like we had also when we had the internet revolution, where content actually boosted our engagement on the internet, I think we're experiencing right now exactly the same, just on audio and voice. So audio bursts, just like as you said, we're making audio searchable. So basically, we listen to around 6 million minutes a month of broadcasted radio and podcast, and based on an individual topic of interest, we curate you with a relevant playlist just on the topics that you like. And we also brief it to you in short clips, so that's why we call it bursts. Okay, so instead of listening to something very long, which might be distracting and I can't really focus on it, we provide you with 30 seconds to 4 minutes of stories that are of your interest. And we started actually without location-based opportunities or anything that could be a little bit more focused, but right now we work with the car industry. So just imagine when everything is connected and your calendar is connected and your navigation system is connected, and we know you're going to the theater and we know you're going to watch the next Avenger movie. And we can actually just offer you the latest movie review on that, right? So you're already in the car, you're on the way to the movies, and you can get that information. Or on another opportunity, you're going somewhere, you're asking for direction to go and buy your next TV. On the way there, we can actually provide you with some product reviews that are coming from radio and other podcast audio that are available there. And I think this is actually just the beginning. There is so much content that we can consume. And going back to the question of, we're used to radio that kind of pushes information into us. And then we have podcasts that we could choose what information we want to have. And Audioburst is kind of combining those both. So providing with on-demand experiences in terms of audio, but also make it easier for discovery and search. I'm sure some people here are listening to podcasts, and I think it can be very frustrating not to necessarily know what podcast you want to listen to. Knowing what are your topic of interest, but then search today when it comes to podcasts is awful. And this is exactly what Audioburst is changing. So I think once we have that search and discovery available to us through audio, connected to the place where I am, to the activity that I'm doing, then all of those devices and all of those opportunities will actually start, to gain more traction.
I'd like to ask a follow-up question for all three of you, if you don't mind. And that is, today, the public is largely complacent about privacy, choosing convenience over privacy, but we're talking about more personalized experiences, lights always on, so you're conversational, location-based services, or curating a list of my interests, which you have. So at what point do you think people in general are going to start to push back on issues of privacy and data transparency, and how does that affect how the voice user experience is monetized?
So I think that one of the things that you really have to be conscious of is making sure that users have control over what they're sharing. In our case, we were very specific about being able to provide users with the opportunity to close the audio channel whenever they wanted to. So you could tell the system to go away, or shut up, or stop listening, or really any phrase of that nature that you really wanted to, and it would just stop right away. And so I think it's really, really important, one, to provide control. The second is to provide real value for users, right? If the value isn't clear to the user, they're much less likely to opt into something like that. And I think the real last thing is to move towards an opt-in instead of an opt-out model, right? That is the default in the EU. It really should be the default everywhere. We did that for our product because we were launching globally. We were launching in 3 European countries as well. But I think that's critical.
Yeah, opt-in, as Andrew was saying, is the most important because with audio, you're almost building this virtual environment around your head. So how many blocks are you going to be pulling into your experience? And so if you just start at full scale, there's going to be option paralysis, oversaturation, that's going to ruin the experience for people. But if people like the Intel team, Accenture team are developing experiences where you can then opt in to what you want to hear, like I was mentioning with some of these restaurant examples or any kind of wayfinding. Hearables can be used for, enable, okay, I want to do an audio tour now, but let's not always have that option available so every time I walk through the park I hear a statue yelling at me. But I think that's really just, the power of customization just has to be more in the hands of the user instead of the brand.
I'll just add to it. So I think in our case, it's opt-in. So you have to choose your topics and you share that information with. I think it's less the technical aspect of opting in or opting out and more the educational side. I think most people, even when they opt in or if they don't opt out, they don't even understand what they're doing. So I don't know if you've noted that, but there was an app lately on Facebook that you give them full access to your pictures, and they create your old version, which looks great. But basically, you give them with access to your pictures, camera, everything on social, and this is exactly where we don't want things to go. So And I've seen like really smart people doing it, and it gives like a really good picture of you when you're old. So I'm very curious to see how that's gonna look with me. But I understand what stands behind it. Most people I think just don't, and it's more from an educational point of view. And so even if you just tell them, do you want to, most people will just click the I agree.
Yeah, this was Faith's app, and
Yeah.
We should do one where you can hear what it sound like when you're old.
Dave, you have done a ton of research and writing on the topic through your through Future Ear, which is an amazing resource. And so I'm curious if you want to weigh in on any of the topics that we've discussed already, but also if we project into the future when these devices become as ubiquitous as our iPhones, what are the societal implications, and how do we move between listening or interacting with content in isolation but together, and re-entering conversations with people in real life?
Yeah, so I think that we all need to take a minute and just think about how fast this has happened. AirPods came out December of 2016, so really 2017, and here we are in the middle of 2019. So in less than 2.5 years, I think it's probably one of the biggest behavior shifts that we've seen, where it's become totally socially normalized to walk around with AirPods for, I think the average time spent with headphones in was about an hour, and now it's moving up toward 4.5 hours per user. So you think about that in terms of just the behavioral shift that's occurred there. And, Apple, they've just released the AirPods version 2, and really one of the most significant things about that is that it has its own dedicated chipset, right? It went from the W series chip that was powering the wearables in the first generation of AirPods to now AirPods version 2 has the H1 chip. And that chip, the first thing that we're seeing that's unique to that chipset, that it allows for the Hey Siri activation. So I think that it's important to see that Apple is kind of looking at this. If they're dedicating its own chipset, I think that indicates that that is a really integral part of the future. And as Andy pointed out, from a hardware perspective, there are less and less barriers of entry, for third-party OEMs, and then also for the other, voice assistant providers to get into this space. I mean, Google's already has the Pixel Buds, Samsung has Galaxy Buds, and I don't think it's far-fetched to think that we'll see Amazon come in with some kind of Amazon Buds, this year, most likely. So I think that what this starts to do, and you have new tools like Audio Burst that will allow for you to start to curate information way more sophisticated, in a much more sophisticated way than you do today. So for example, you might be able to say, I want to know the recent news that's going on with Tesla, right? And so what you'll do then is, rather than it pull up a Business Insider article for you, it will actually string together a series of radio interviews or podcast interviews where they're talking specifically about this. So, it might be, say, an interview that someone from Tesla is doing, or two commentators are doing, and maybe 30 minutes of that podcast aren't even related to Tesla, and then it's going to zero in on the 5 minutes of the conversation that is tied to Tesla. So you're now starting to extract particular context in the actual content that's being produced, and stringing it together with other content. So I think what I've thought about is this idea of like the Aural attention economy, right? If you think about the way that the app economy works on our phones today, so much of it is based around the attention economy. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, whatever. All these things, your currency, more or less, that you're giving to the app is your time, right? Your attention. And so our attention, our time, is the commodity that we all collectively own, and is the asset that is constantly in demand by all these companies. And so I think it's likely that we'll see the attention economy start to move more toward our ears, so that rather than spending 4 hours a day looking at all the different social media apps, you're actually spending 2 hours looking at social media apps, and then you're spending the other 2 hours consuming similar types of content via your ears. And the reason and the way that will all start to really manifest is through new tools that enable creators to publish content, make it as easy as it is to write a tweet, to post on Facebook, to post on Instagram. All of that, it took 10 years for the mobile economy to really mature and enable the type of facilitation that it allows for today. It's so easy to pull your phone out, take a picture, record a video, whatever it might be. But that was all predicated on technology that was sort of maturing in tandem together. And so I think one of the most interesting things that we're seeing right now is all of the building blocks to enable content consumption in a really unique manner for our ears, whether it be from the hardware side or whether it be for tools or whether it be from the designers that are thinking about the unique environments and contexts that you're in when you're using hearables or you're using sonic branding as a way to indicate attention, right? It doesn't always have to be a voice that's telling you something. You might have a nonverbal cue that is indicating something while you are on the go, whether it be the ba-da-ba-ba-ba, saying there's a McDonald's nearby, or some sort of distinct noise, like to Mark Webster's point, where when you put something in the trash on the computer, you hear that crinkling sound of like the paper getting thrown away. When you start to develop those sonic brands and those audio cues, it allows for brands and other entities to communicate with the users in a really effective way that is conducive to a real audio-only environment.
Quick follow-up to the audio cue, sonic cue question, and this can be for anybody, but the trash can metaphor we've been able to get used to because we had that visual way of understanding it. Is there a way to educate users on what the sonic cues mean without being explicit and stating it verbally?
Right. That's always a classic example because I think it borrows off of just the existing philosophy of Apple anyway, of the art of skeuomorphism. And so the sound of something going in the trash matched the visual icon of a trash can. So there's no real learning to that. It's already a sound you'd expect to hear when you do something like that. I think that we do a lot of research into something we call gestural intuition. So things like a positive sound would be upward motion, negative downward. I think there's a lot of things that we'd be surprised that we inherently understand, and that's why we do a lot of user testing on this to showcase how well people can perceive experiences and what are these premium experiences versus the generic ones, and how does that increase things like purchase intent, as well as how well do people understand the interaction that's being present with one sound versus another. I think that Mark's point, he's already put out some good articles on earcons. We're friendly with their team as well, and I think that in terms of things we can already do now, like I was talking before about what's the future going to sound like, but if you look at common practice for maybe people put their phone on mute because they don't want it to be making a sound when they're in public. But now that I have Bose frames on, no one else is going to hear that notification. Or if I had AirPods in, no one else will hear that, but I will. And I can tell you that maybe 60% of my apps just use a default operating system notification. So the Apple tri-tone sound. Now brands can really take advantage of this because now that more people are kind of opting in to just listen to their phone, I have kind of the trifecta of phone, wearable, and hearable. Now, if my phone just vibrates, I don't know if I should look or not. Yeah, maybe it's easier to just quickly peek at what's there, although maybe it looks rude because maybe I'm looking at the time. But with hearables, you don't really have to do anything, you just get that knowledge. And so I think that's something that brands can take advantage of. Literally right now, we don't even need to advance any further than them to take advantage of that opportunity of creating a distinction of what, maybe even what the Hoova app sounds like, because I don't know if that's Instagram or Hoova or some other app, and that's just, I think, a great space to work in, and there's a lot of these design elements that people can piggyback off of, just sounds that we inherently understand.
I actually think that it's not so new for us. So we are analyzing radio stations, and we transcribe all of the content, but a major component of our understanding of where a story starts and where it ends is audio cues. So we might not even notice, but the radio is based on audio cues, so we know when they're going on for advertisement or where it's going to be the weather or traffic. But we just understand it because we've grown into it, and we know that after this cue we're going to hear the weather, right? So it's something that we're used to, but it seems like it's gaining more interest now in the world of really audio all over.
Exactly. I mean, since 1929, NBC has been using some form of or some variation of their 3 chimes. Now, originally that was an internal user experience because it was telling switchboard operators to do something. But when something like that becomes so iconic, then it becomes an outward asset. And you could argue that the same thing and the same process then happened with the Google Now sound, now Google Assistant, where then that becomes leveraged with the visual animation of the G Google commercials. Siri then followed suit, and now they actually modify commercials. I saw one based on the battery life of the iPhone X, and they'll play the battery charging sound. And so they become so, there's a difference there, I think, between learning a sound, because a sound like that, over time it becomes so ubiquitous. You might not know immediately, but by now it's everywhere.
I mean, I'd like to come back to something that Dave, you mentioned with a prediction that we'll spend 4 hours, maybe more, with these devices in our ears. And you and Andy both work in an industry where hearing health is obviously at the forefront. Andy, do you have any thoughts on how we as designers, whether we're designing the form factor, the experiences, can encourage hearing health, appropriate volume levels, taking a break? Is it even a concern?
No, I think it's a very good point. You start to see some of the direct technology enablements for protecting hearing health. There's a few companies now actually doing live monitoring of the listening level. It will give you some guidance that, if you're listening at this volume level, you should only listen for so long. But in general, once you go in the ear, you have tighter control. You don't need as loud a volume level. And so therefore, you can have safe listening levels for long periods of time. And related, long before you get to the point where you're wearing hearing aids, many people have some sort of impairment. And Hearables is a great way to address that issue, sometimes in subtle ways. If you, for example, have a hearable, you just run a hearing test and then equalize the balance of hearing test, now all of a sudden you can hear everything better. And so it's a very enabling technology as well.
So I don't know how many of you are or have developed for Android, but Android actually limits applications on what they can do in terms of the volume level. So even if I, as a user, if I'm building a conversational interface on Android that's separate from Google Assistant, and I say, turn the volume to 100%, the OS will actually stop you from doing that on the programming side, and will actually force the user to confirm that that is actually what they want. So we can start thinking about how do we actually encourage users to think through these sorts of things so they're not damaging their ears, right? We can confirm with them, we can make sure that that's what they want, we can provide test sounds, right? So we're not doing the damage to their health.
I'd love to ask 1 or 2 more questions and then we can open up to the audience for the last 5 minutes or so. Dave, when we think about accessibility and sort of what some of these technologies are rooted in, going from hearing aid to hearing enhancement, and now this sort of Sierra de Bergerac helper in your ear, how do we ensure that we're not increasing the digital divide for those that can afford them and those that can't? Are they going to be so inexpensive that it doesn't matter?
That's a good question. I think that a lot of what Andy had said initially is sort of this idea that a lot of the cost barriers around hearing aids today are tied to the components inside it. So as the component costs reduce due to Moore's law, and the other added benefit of AirPods is that because of the mass proliferation of these devices, a lot of those components inside of it, due to the economies of scale of AirPods, it reduces the cost there. So I think ultimately there will be a reduction in the cost of the goods sold. And I think that what's exciting is that with Hearables, there's a different spectrum of hearing loss. You can have a mild hearing loss all the way to a profound hearing loss. And what we're already starting to see with some of the different devices, the majority of the hearing loss population resides in the mild to moderate losses. And so if you can start to treat those with these lower cost hearable options, I think what it does is it enables more and more people to start to treat their hearing loss and get into that. And then what I think it also does is, it allows for people to get an idea of what life's like when you're treating that hearing loss. Because a big factor with hearing loss going untreated is that people wait on average of 7 years to even treat their hearing loss. It's a combination of the stigma that's involved with I don't want to look old and I don't want to feel old and have it feel like I have this disability, and then the cost. And so I think that as time goes on and it becomes more like, I think that's one of the big things about this idea that AirPods is completely normalizing this idea of wearing things in and around your ears for a longer portion of the day. If we get to the point where we're all sort of wearing things in our ears for a longer and longer period of time, and it's, and through a variety of different form factors, I think that starts to kind of beg the question, who cares? Do you really care if you're wearing a hearing aid when at the end of the day people are wearing similar form factors for entirely different use cases, because this is all evolving in such a way where there's a variety of new things that you can do with these devices.
It's a really great point. And so going from making the form factor a little bit more invisible to now AirPods are very apparent and they're almost seen as a status symbol maybe. Andreea, I'm curious if you think that we'll continue to go in the direction of like designer collabs and you really want people to see them, or will it go in the direction of making them shrink down and become more invisible?
I think it can go both ways, actually. I think that to some degree, there's going to be some level of customization and styling that comes along with it. I mean, glasses are a perfect example of that, right? They're already, part of your brand, part of your look, part of your fashion, and that'll continue to be true, right? And for other times, when you're not wearing glasses, when you don't want something on your face, I think we'll see miniaturization and kind of this regression into ubiquity around us and around the environment.
Yeah, do you need less?
Yeah, I would agree. What we're seeing is that hearable devices are going to start to be a fashion statement like eyeglasses have become. And so that when I go to the beach, I'm putting those on, sunglass form. I'm going out, if I'm a female, I might put some stylish earrings in that are also hearable. Right? There are other cases where yes, I may want to go more covert. There's lots of different ways that can be played. And you can develop a style all your own. This is really what Apple did very well. If another company had introduced that form factor, I doubt it would have been successful. But they created a style, and that's a style that anybody, man or woman, can wear, and it becomes part of a fashion statement. So we'll get to the point where you're going to be wearing different kinds of hearables for different purposes. My sport hearable is going to be different than when I'm going on a date. So you'll have different form factors, different appearances, different style statements, different functionality depending on what you're doing.
I have a follow-up question on that. Do you see them now as competition?
Do I see what is
Do you see Bose or Apple iPod as potential competition for just hearables for?
Well, no, I mean they are hearables, right? So I mean, of course, Bose is going to on a certain level be competing with other people trying to do the same thing, but it's such a nascent industry right now that there's a lot of upward mobility in the different ways that people do things. The fact that Bose is successful is not going to make Apple less successful.
And I think at some point they're going to become complementary, because with the Bose glasses, you have the potential to go multimodal. You have the potential for AR. You have all these other modalities that you can bring in. With the AirPods, you can't do that yet, right? And so they're just going to serve, at a certain point in time, they're going to serve different purposes.
Any questions?
Can any of you talk about, I'm a little bit interested in like biometrics and biofeedback and integration of hearables and what the opportunities are in having the voice integration and kind of reading out your blood pressure is too low or it's
It's interesting you say that. Yeah. So I would say one of the most one of the biggest areas of innovation to keep an eye on is around biometrics within the ear devices. So just as of this year, PPG sensors, which are the heart rate sensors that, say, an Apple Watch uses, that's the optical sensor that's just become miniature enough to fit on a receiver in the canal hearing aid like Andy has here. So really about the smallest device that you can fit it on. So the feasibility of putting them on AirPods is entirely likely and probably pretty plausible. So I think that what we'll see is, in the same way that you can collect that kind of biometric information in your Apple Watch, you'll be able to do the same thing with your hearables. And I think it's a really interesting juxtaposition to think about how you could layer on a voice assistant with that, because it's one thing to record all that data, but then you need to assess that data and even know what you're looking at. So if you have a proactive element to that that can say, here is what your heart rate looked like over the past week, and it can notify you of any potentially worrisome aspects to that, I think that's a very likely scenario where we'll see a smart assistant playing the role of sort of a preventative health assistant in that regard.
So independently, Intel also developed a set of earbuds that could detect heart rate like 5 years back. But also, when we were tracking heart rate inside of the coaching application, our coaching app could actually tell you, hey, you're fatigued right now. Like, you've hit cardiovascular fatigue, because we could tell, for example, that your heart rate wasn't reacting in the same ways as before. So your trends were different. So I think that it opens up really large possibilities of tracking more generally, both for fitness tracking, injury prevention, as well as like a lot of elderly use cases to allow them to become more autonomous too, right? For longer into life. There's tons and tons of work right now being done, not just on biometrics, on fall detection, on all these other things, and that's just going to start becoming more and more prevalent.
And I'll give a practical example of that. The average hearing aid wearer is about 70 years old or so, which implies you can have an older person living alone wearing a hearing aid. Well, one of the hearing aid companies, US-based company, Starkey, has built inertial sensors and machine learning to detect falls. And it will automatically trigger a message to a person that you designate, so that if you fall, they'll get an alert and you can go look after the person. It's a very practical application of hearables and health maintenance.
I think we're at time, but maybe one more question if y'all are cool to stay.
Yeah, this is general to the panel. I was interested in knowing if you had seen something within the industrial sector or professional applications where people is wearing these hardware and they are being helped in their daily activities, whether they need free hands, and they're wearing it for a long period of time. Do you have any examples?
That is, I just read an article not too long ago, I can't remember, a major corporation actually is, training new people on the factory floor and the maintenance with hearable devices, where they actually talk you through the steps, or if you're doing a maintenance procedure, it'll go through the checklist, by voice, so you can have both hands working and use the voice assistant to work through the checklist.
Recon Instruments is also working on an industrial application when they were still around, similarly using both voice as well as kind of AR visuals to be able to go through training. There's a ton of work being done in this space.
Awesome. We'll just go down the line, 1 to 2 words on things you're most excited about in the next 2-year timeline.
Sure. I think dynamic noise canceling and hearing. So if you talked about changing between devices and everything, I'd love to see a future where if I'm on an airplane, get a lot of noise cancellation, when someone's talking to me, localize their voice, bring that into my experience, just like Alexa Guard can hear glass breaking and give you an alert. So it'll be doing listening for you, as well as allowing you to hear more things, control your environment. And for anyone curious to think if they can pick out these sounds, because I hear earphones going off even in the audience, enable all sonic branding quiz on Alexa. We just developed the skill so you can test your knowledge of earcons and you can learn a few facts from our proprietary research.
I'm really excited for the way that hearable devices are going to enable people with either various impairments or other issues to lead a more active life. That's what hearing aids have always done, and now can be more broadly extended. I've seen, for example, somebody who's working on a hearable coach for people who are being treated for behavioral issues, that in other words, it can start to detect their emotional state and help them address that, in a live session with the hearable versus, waiting until after you're meeting your therapist the next time. So there's lots of different ways that hearables can enable people to lead full lives despite any range of issues.
I would say the idea of this aural attention economy, passive content consumption, I think that's really, really interesting, and it's going to drive a lot of this. And then also the world of biometrics, the new sensors that are being implemented, and then layering on a voice assistant that can proactively engage you with what it's assessing from that data.
Yeah, so for me, I think it's more how is it going to look holistically, or how is it going to work together, visual and audio together. I think it's a challenge for us today, and it goes back to the attention. Are we going to listen and look at the same time, which is what we're doing today? Is it going to change? So this is something that I assume that we're going to discover in the next couple of years if we're going to lose our attention to visual and just dedicate it to audio and sound, or we're going to continue and combine both.
Really building off the last two folks, what I'm looking forward to is really contextually relevant multimodal experiences, really being able to augment our world with the sights and sounds that will actually improve and facilitate our lives.
Awesome, thank you guys so much. Encourage you all to follow everything that these folks are doing because they're all brilliant and they're driving the industry forward. So.